The autumn morning in Portland, Maine carried the sharp smell of fallen leaves as antique appraiser Sarah Mitchell stepped into the Victorian house on Elm Street. The Whitmore estate sale had attracted collectors from all over New England. Still, Sarah's trained eye was quickly drawn to a small group of photographs arranged on an ornate mahogany table. Among the sepia-toned portraits and family scenes, one photograph in particular held her gaze. It was a formal studio portrait from 1914, showing a well-dressed family of four. A serious-looking father stood in a dark suit beside a woman wearing an elegant white blouse, her hair styled neatly in the popular Gibson girl fashion. Two young children stood with them, a boy around 8 years old and a girl no more than 5. The photograph carried the embossed mark of Hartwell Studios of Boston, showing it was taken at one of the city's most respected photography studios. The family looked well off, their clothing pointing to an upper-middle-class lifestyle in the years before the war. Sarah lifted the silver frame and studied the image more carefully. The arrangement was typical for that era, with the father standing behind his seated wife and the children placed carefully at their sides. Yet something about the mother's posture felt strange, even though the rest of the family stared straight into the camera with the serious expressions common at the time. The woman's left hand sat in an odd position, her fingers curved as if hiding something. "Interesting piece, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. An elderly woman stepped closer and introduced herself as Margaret Whitmore, the great-granddaughter of the home's original owners. "Do you know anything about this family?" Sarah asked, her professional curiosity rising. Margaret shook her head. The photograph had come with other items they inherited. "I believe it belonged to a family named Patterson. Beyond that, I'm afraid I don't know their story." Sarah looked at the image again, the strange position of the mother's hand continuing to bother her instincts. Back in her downtown Portland office, Sarah placed the photograph under her professional magnifying equipment. Years of appraising antiques had taught her that the most important discoveries were often hidden in small details others missed. As she adjusted the light and focus, the image sharpened clearly. The father's mustache was neatly waxed, the children's clothing clean and perfectly pressed, but it was the mother's hand that held Sarah's full attention. Between the woman's fingers, barely noticeable at first glance, was the edge of something white. It looked like paper, a small piece carefully hidden but not fully concealed from the camera. The way her fingers curled suggested she was holding it on purpose, perhaps hoping it would escape notice in the formal portrait. Sarah's heart beat faster. In her 15 years of work, she had learned that people often hid meaningful things in plain sight, especially during times of fear or crisis. The year 1914 stood out for that reason. It marked the start of World War I, a time when families across America faced uncertainty and difficult choices. She photographed the detail with her high-resolution camera and enhanced the image on her computer. The white object became slightly clearer, appearing to be folded paper, though what was written on it remained unknown. Sarah reached for her phone and called her colleague, Dr. James Reed, a historian who specialized in early 20th century American social history at the University of Southern Maine. "James, I have something you might want to see," she said, her voice filled with the excitement she always felt when uncovering a possible historical mystery. "It's a 1914 family portrait, but the mother is hiding something in her hand, something she didn't want seen, yet couldn't bring herself to let go of. Send me the images." James replied at once. 1914 was a turning point year. Families were dealing with economic stress and the coming war. Whatever she hid could tell an important story. Dr. James Reed studied the high-resolution images Sarah sent him. His historian's mind quickly understood the possible meaning of the hidden object. The formal nature of studio portraits in 1914 meant nothing appeared by chance. Every detail was planned. "The Hartwell Studios mark is our first strong lead," James explained during their meeting at the university. Theodore Hartwell ran one of Boston's most exclusive studios from 1895 to 1925. If his records still exist, they could help identify this family. James spent the morning calling Boston historical societies and archives. The Massachusetts Historical Society confirmed they had received Hartwell's business records in 1967, including appointment books and client details. "I'm driving to Boston tomorrow," Sarah said. "This mystery won't solve itself." The next morning, Sarah found herself inside the climate-controlled archives of the Massachusetts Historical Society. The Hartwell Studios collection filled 3 large boxes with appointment ledgers, client letters, and photographic materials. She started with the 1914 appointment book, slowly scanning the entries. Under March 15, 1914, she found what she was looking for. Patterson family portrait, 2 RPM. Payment $12.50, premium sitting. The entry listed an address, 145 Beacon Street, Boston. The note about a premium sitting suggested a wealthy family able to afford Hartwell's most expensive service. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she photographed the entry. The next step was to research the Patterson family at that address, and she sensed she was close to uncovering something important. A librarian approached her table and asked if she had found what she needed. "I think so," Sarah replied. "Now I need to learn who the Pattersons were and what a mother might feel driven to hide in her hand during what should have been a happy family portrait." The weight of the mystery followed her as she prepared to dig deeper into the Patterson family history. The genealogy department of the Boston Public Library became Sarah's next stop. Using the address from Hartwell's records, she pieced together the Patterson family story through city directories, census data, and old newspapers. The 1910 census showed the household clearly. Thomas Patterson, age 42, was listed as a textile merchant. His wife, Eleanor, was 36, their son, William, was 8, and their daughter, Catherine, was 5. The family employed 2 servants, a sign of real wealth during Boston's textile boom. Thomas Patterson owned Patterson and Associates, a successful textile importing firm with connections to mills across New England. The company dealt in fine European fabrics, placing the Pattersons among Boston's respected merchant families. But as Sarah read deeper into newspapers from 1914, she found disturbing details. A small notice in the Boston Globe from February 1914 mentioned that Patterson and Associates faced trouble due to changing European trade conditions. More alarming was an item in the Boston Herald dated March 10, 1914, just 5 days before the family portrait. It reported that local textile merchant Thomas Patterson had been questioned by federal investigators over suspected irregularities in import documents. Sarah's heart pounded. The family had paid for an expensive portrait while under federal investigation. This new context gave deeper meaning to Eleanor Patterson's hidden object. What had she concealed in her hand during what might have been their last portrait as a successful Boston family? A reference librarian, noticing Sarah's intense focus, quietly approached. "Are you researching the Patterson textile scandal?" she asked. Sarah looked up, surprised. "You know about it?" The librarian nodded. "It's a fascinating case. Thomas Patterson was convicted of customs fraud in 1915. The family lost everything, their home, the business, their place in society. And Eleanor Patterson," she paused, "disappeared shortly after the trial. Some say she escaped to Canada with the children. Others believe something more tragic happened." Sarah felt a chill run through her. Whatever Eleanor Patterson had hidden in her hand during that March 1914 portrait now seemed far more important than a simple family memento. Sarah's research led her to the National Archives B Ranch in Boston, where federal court records from 1914 and 1915 were kept. The Patterson case file was thicker than she expected, filled with investigation reports, witness statements, and evidence lists. The case revealed a complicated scheme of customs fraud that had gone on for 3 years. Thomas Patterson had underreported the value of imported textiles, avoiding thousands of dollars in federal tariffs. The plan involved fake paperwork and bribes to port officials. As Sarah read further, she uncovered something unexpected. Federal agents had suspected Eleanor Patterson was more involved than she appeared. A Treasury Department memo dated March 8, 1914 stated, "Evidence suggests Mrs. Eleanor Patterson maintained separate financial records and correspondence related to the import scheme." Recommend immediate search of family residence. The search was scheduled for March 16, 1914, one day after the family portrait. Sarah's pulse raced as the timing became clear. Eleanor Patterson knew agents were coming to search their home. The portrait taken on March 15th was not just a formal photograph. It was taken on the final day of the life they had known. In the evidence inventory from the March 16th search, Sarah noticed an important detail. The report stated that the premises had been searched completely and that no additional documents were found. It also noted that the subject may have destroyed or hidden relevant materials before the search. The story was starting to make sense. Eleanor Patterson had hidden something in her hand during the portrait, possibly evidence she could not bring herself to destroy, yet was too afraid to leave inside the house. The photograph itself may have been her way of keeping proof of whatever she was trying to protect. A folder labeled "Unrecovered Evidence" drew Sarah's attention. Inside it, she found a handwritten note from the lead investigator. It stated that Mrs. Patterson claimed she knew nothing about her husband's actions, but witness accounts suggested she had been present at several suspicious meetings with foreign contacts. It also said her understanding of the family's finances appeared to be extensive. Sarah photographed every important document, her thoughts racing as she wondered what Eleanor Patterson had hidden on that March afternoon in 1914. Court transcripts from Thomas Patterson's 1915 trial gave Sarah a disturbing picture of the family's final months together. Eleanor Patterson had testified briefly in support of her husband, insisting on her innocence and claiming she had no knowledge of the customs fraud. More interesting, however, were witness statements buried deep in the case files. Margaret Donnelly, the family's former housekeeper, had given testimony that was never used in court. She stated that Mrs. Patterson was always writing letters, often to people overseas, and that she kept a special writing box that she locked and hid. In the weeks before Mr. Patterson's arrest, she had burned NY papers in the fireplace. Another witness, a neighbor named Robert Sinclair, reported unusual behavior as well. He said that the night before the portrait sitting, he saw Mrs. Patterson in her garden close to midnight, appearing to bury something beneath the rose bushes. The most unsettling testimony came from Catherine Patterson's schoolteacher, Miss Helen Rogers. She recalled that after Mr. Patterson's arrest, Eleanor came to take Catherine out of school. She looked deeply upset and kept repeating, "I have to protect what matters most." That was the last time anyone at the school saw either the mother or the daughter. Sarah's research into Eleanor's disappearance showed that she and the children vanished in April 1915, shortly after Thomas's conviction. Police records indicated they left their Beacon Street home with only personal belongings and no forwarding address. William Patterson, the 8-year-old son, was briefly enrolled in a school in Burlington, Vermont, in May 1915, but records showed the family left after just 2 weeks. After that, all traces disappeared. The Boston Police Department opened a missing persons investigation, but it concluded that Eleanor had likely fled to escape the scandal and possible charges against her. No signs of violence were found. As Sarah read the final police report dated December 1915, one sentence stood out. It said that Mrs. Patterson's disappearance appeared voluntary, but her knowledge of her husband's crimes and possible possession of undiscovered evidence made her a person of ongoing interest to federal authorities. Whatever Eleanor Patterson had hidden in her hand in 1914 had clearly been important enough to risk everything to protect. Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected place. While researching Eleanor Patterson's disappearance, she posted questions on several genealogy websites. 3 days after her visit to the Boston Archives, she received an email from a woman named Ruth Caldwell in Burlington, Vermont. The message said that Ruth believed her grandmother might have been Catherine Patterson. She explained that her grandmother always claimed her real name was Catherine, though she used the name Carol Caldwell throughout her adult life. She had died in 1995, but left behind items that might be important, including what she called her mother's secret. Sarah called Ruth immediately, her hands shaking as she dialed. Ruth was a retired teacher in her 70s, the granddaughter of the little girl in the 1914 photograph. Ruth explained that her grandmother rarely spoke about her early childhood. She said her father had been involved in serious trouble and that her mother had saved important papers. She kept a small metal box her entire life, saying it held proof of the truth. Ruth agreed to meet Sarah the next day in Burlington. That night, Sarah barely slept, wondering what Eleanor Patterson's secret might finally reveal after more than 100 years. The next morning in Ruth's warm and quiet Burlington home, Sarah finally saw Catherine Patterson's legacy. The metal box was small, about the size of a jewelry box, with the initials EP engraved on the lid, standing for Eleanor Patterson. Inside, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth, were several items: a letter addressed to Catherine, a small photograph, and 3 folded documents that appeared to be official papers. Ruth said softly that her grandmother made her promise to keep the box safe. She said that one day someone would come searching for the truth about what really happened to her family. She always believed her mother was innocent and that her father had been protecting someone else. Sarah's hands trembled as she gently unfolded the letter Eleanor had written to her daughter. The handwriting was neat but rushed, and the date was March 15, 1914, the same day the family portrait was taken. With Ruth's permission, Sarah read the letter aloud, both women listening closely to each word from the past. The letter explained that Catherine's father was not the criminal the government believed him to be. The real person behind the customs fraud was his business partner, Jonathan Harwick, who had been using Thomas Patterson's name and forging his signature for over 2 years. Eleanor wrote that she had proof of Jonathan's guilt, including letters between him and corrupt port officials, forged documents, and financial records showing payments from accounts Thomas never knew existed. She wrote that Jonat Hahn had threatened the family when Thomas began questioning problems in the business. He warned that if he were exposed, he would make sure Thomas was convicted and possibly sent to prison or deported. Eleanor explained that the family portrait taken that day might be their last. Hidden in her hand was the key to a safety deposit box at the First National Bank of Boston, box number 247. Inside that box was all the evidence needed to prove Thomas's innocence and Jonathan's guilt. She said she could not risk keeping the papers in the house, knowing federal agents would search it. If anything happened to her or Thomas, Catherine was to retrieve the evidence when she was older. She added that the bank manager, a trusted family friend, would help her when the time came. Eleanor wrote that Thomas chose to protect the family instead of fighting charges he knew were false. He believed accepting blame would keep them safe from Jonathan's threats, but she could not allow an innocent man's name to be ruined forever. She reminded Catherine that courage sometimes means protecting the truth until the right moment arrives. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she finished reading. The key hidden in Eleanor's hand had not been a sign of guilt. It was proof of innocence, carefully preserved for more than a century. Ruth wiped her eyes and said her grandmother always believed her mother was brave. She had kept the letter her whole life, waiting for someone who would care enough to uncover the truth. The next morning, Sarah and Ruth drove together to Boston, the metal box secured safely in Sarah's briefcase. The First National Bank of Boston no longer existed under its original name, but records showed that its safety deposit boxes had been transferred to a downtown branch after a merger in the 1960s. Bank manager Jennifer Walsh listened carefully as Sarah explained the historical importance of their request. Although Safety Deposit Box 247 had been sealed for over a century due to unpaid fees, the bank's legal team confirmed that Catherine Patterson's daughter, as Eleanor's closest heir, had the right to open it. Walsh admitted the situation was highly unusual, but with proper documents and the historical context, they could proceed. In the bank vault, Box 247 sat among many others long forgotten. When Walsh inserted the key Eleanor had hidden in her hand in 1914, it turned easily, as if waiting for this moment. Inside were the documents Eleanor had described. There were detailed letters between Jonathan Harwick and corrupt port officials, bank records proving bribes and practice sheets showing Harwick perfecting Thomas Patterson's forged signature. There was also a letter from Harwick to Eleanor dated March 5, 1914, clearly threatening the family if Thomas continued asking questions. Ruth held one of the papers, her grandmother's long struggle finally justified. She said her grandmother had been right all along, and her mother really had protected the truth. Sarah photographed every document, already planning how to present this historical discovery. Thomas Patterson had been innocent, accepting blame to shield his family from a dangerous man. Eleanor Patterson had not been an accomplice but a mother preserving proof of her husband's innocence for future generations. The box held one final item, another photograph showing Thomas Patterson and Jonathan Harwick smiling and shaking hands at their textile business, a painful reminder of the betrayal that followed. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a full auditorium at the Massachusetts Historical Society, sharing her findings with historians, genealogists, and members of the Patterson family who came forward after news of the discovery spread. Experts confirmed the documents and forged signatures were authentic. The story gained national attention as an example of a historical injustice finally brought to light. Although no formal exoneration was possible due to time, the federal court system acknowledged Thomas Patterson's conviction as a miscarriage of justice. More importantly, the Patterson family name was cleared in the historical record. Ruth Caldwell donated Eleanor's letter and the contents of the safety deposit box to the Massachusetts Historical Society so future researchers could study this remarkable story. Dr. James Reed later discovered that Jonathan Harwick fled to South America in 1916, soon after Thomas's conviction, strongly supporting Eleanor's account. As Sarah ended her presentation, she displayed the original 1914 photograph beside Eleanor's letter. She reminded the audience that photographs are more than simple images. They are frozen moments holding stories waiting to be uncovered. Eleanor Patterson's hidden key was not just a secret. It was a mother's determination to protect the truth for generations to come. In the audience, Ruth smiled through tears, finally seeing her grandmother's faith in her mother's story confirmed. The little girl in the 1914 photograph had carried her mother's secret throughout her life, and more than a century later, that secret restored her family's honor. The once ordinary studio portrait had become lasting proof of love, truth, and the quiet power of what can be hidden in plain sight.